Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the worst crime you've ever heard about from your town or city? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A man was trying to sell his truck in order to afford the new baby on the way. His pregnant wife watched as he got into his truck with a potential buyer and potential buyer's friend. He never came back home. Turns out the potential buyer was a rich guy's kid whom already was suspected of murdering his ex-girlfriend, and a family member killed the man for his truck. He had access to acres and acres of land to bury the bodies. A group of assholes broke into a house where a family lived. The family consisted of 3 kids, their 2 parents, and 1 grandmother. The thugs tied everyone down and shot them in the back of their heads execution style, from oldest to youngest. For some reason, they weren't the smartest people. They ran out of bullets before killing the youngest kid, so they took him to their van, slit his throat, and threw him over a bridge. Luckily, and again because they weren't the smartest bunch, the kid survived. They slit his throat the wrong way, and the bridge wasn't really that high. The kid went to the police, and the idiots got arrested. Turns out, one of the idiots was renting a house from the father of the family, and he just didn't want to pay rent, and that's why they did it. I almost got into a fist fight with a woman in a parking lot. A month later, she poisoned her entire family. People are asking for additional info, so here it is. I was walking along a road and she pulled up on me coming out of a driveway. I was like, I'm walking here, and she threw an empty cup at me but missed. I had a spork in my hand, so I threw that at her and missed. She then jumped out of her car, came charging at me. I had a bag of chicken wings, hence the spork, and I planted my feet and was going to beat the shit out of her with the wings. She jumped back in the car and drove off with me calling her every evil name in the book. A month later, I glanced at my hometown name on the CNN website. Woman poisons entire family in my town. Just under that was a picture of the woman I got into a confrontation with. She killed like 5 family members because she was under the influence of some kind of cult or something. A police officer murdered his family and then committed suicide with his service gun. And a woman asked some policemen inside my local police station to get her home by car because she was afraid of her ex would kill her. The policemen refused. She went outside the police station and got murdered by her ex right outside the police station. These are my neighborhoods because my city has 3 million citizens. I can't think of the worst in all of the city. Couple of murders in mine. One Korean guy chopped up his wife and outed her in a suitcase. The bus driver helped lift it on the bus as it looked heavy. Second one killed his wife and drove with her in the boot to his favorite pub to have a meal and 2 pints before handing himself in. Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, 2 of the worst serial killers and artists in Canada. One of the worst plea deals a prosecutor has ever made. Homolka agreed to 12 years to testify against Bernardo, did so. Then it was revealed she was just as bad if not worse than him. Too late, the deal was made. I was in grade 4. I still remember how terrifying it was, how everyone was on high alert, how kids couldn't go alone anywhere, and then the horror when the facts came out during trial. A tie between 2. A son strangled his mother in her bed because she was going to kick him out of her house due to his behavior. I thought he'd be a weird-looking, skinny incel type guy. Nope, he's a hulking 19-year-old that looks like an NFL linebacker. I think he's like 6'4". A child was placed back with his birth family at the recommendation of CPS despite being removed from their custody for the first year of his life, immediately after being born due to the presence of drugs in the child's system. A couple months after being returned to his bio parents, he was found dead in their home due to severe neglect, torture, and blunt force trauma. He was only 5. There were other children in the home found in filthy conditions, starving with signs of physical abuse, along with animals locked in cages who hadn't been let out in months. Both CPS and the parents are the criminals in this one. Coworker, actually. She was hanging out with a guy friend. I know for a fact they weren't sleeping with each other. They were genuinely friends. Her psychotic fiancé breaks into the friend's apartment and brutally stabs and murders her and completely F's the friend's arm up. Remember the day I went into work and one of my coworkers read the news article and broke down. Teenage girl was arred and murdered. They arrested a guy and put him in jail for life. A few years later, his mentally unstable brother offs himself in a random Walmart parking lot, and they found a confession note in the Aaron murder. They let the dude out of jail. Law enforcement dropped the biggest of balls about the whole case. They wrote a book about it. A doctor from the town I grew up in went on trial for purposefully poisoning and over-medicating patients. Was acquitted, but it was in the 60s, where convictions were trying to shoot fish in a barrel. Most people think he did it. Also, my elementary school vice principal randomly quit one year, and next thing we knew, a year later, he was arrested for major drug charges, let out on bail, and jumps off of a cliff and kills himself. In 1985, somebody bombed a house and it caused a huge fire and explosion. 11 people, 5 were children, were effing murdered. 61 homes were destroyed across several city blocks and 250 people were left homeless. The remains of those killed, that weren't completely incinerated, were then held hostage for almost 4 decades. I'm trying to remember the name of the murderers. Or were they terrorists? It's so hard sometimes to recall. Oh wait, it was the effing Philadelphia Police Department who bombed American citizens and murdered children. The CFO of the local community college drove 30 miles from the nearest casino, 3 times over the legal limit for blood alcohol level, with multiple calls to police about a car on the wrong side of the road. Was never pulled over. Didn't yield when turning left and hit the motorcycle. The guy on the bike got trapped underneath the car, got dragged about 20 feet with his bike, and the guy just took off. Several witnesses, one whose witness testimony wasn't allowed due to English not being their first language, one of them followed him to his house, where police later arrested him, was facing 20 plus years in prison, offered a plea deal with no more than 10 and the chance to plead his way down to 7. Also, his sentencing date was pushed out from a customary of 30 to 45 days out to over 100 days because he wanted to spend time with his family. Never got his license suspended, only paid a $5,000 bond when he was arrested the first night. Older man who dated a bunch of immigrant Muslim men, presumably because it's taboo in their culture or religion to talk about homosexuality, who basically took pictures of them being tortured and then murdering them. He was a landscaper and also a mall Santa, and he hid the dismembered body parts in people's yards. He was charged with dozens of murders, but knowing how old he is, there's probably dozens more that no one will ever find out about. Some real Dexter shit. Also, some other guy on a Greyhound who tore the head and heart off a random stranger. He ate the heart. Surprisingly, our city is one of the safest places to live in, LOL. Well, there's only so much abuse a person can take, I suppose, so... yeah, I mean, 2 wrongs don't make a right necessarily, but enough's enough, so... That's it. Good for her. This happened back in the 60s, I think. Husband was an abusive drunk with a limp. Comes home drunk one night, hits his wife with his crutch. She hits him in the head with a pipe and kills him. She dug a hole in the basement to bury him. Hole was too small for the body, so she cut off his legs to make him fit. She called her sister and confessed. Cops came and arrested her. One of the best mugshots I've ever seen. She was sitting back, black-eyed, smoking a cigarette like nothing had ever happened. You could tell she was an abused wife who'd had enough. She served time, but I think she ended up getting paroled early. 10 years ago, 2 mothers took their 6 kids to my neighborhood's community pool. While the kids were enjoying themselves, one of the mothers was drinking and got hammered. She was the one driving. When they were done at the pool, they told the 6 kids to ride off top of the car because their bathing suits were still wet. As she took a bend on my street, maybe about 600 feet from my house, she took it too fast, and 4 of the kids fell off onto the street. All 4 were sent to the hospital, but one of them, a 12-year-old, was transported via care flight. She died later that evening in the hospital. Some that I remember are a man broke into another guy's place to beat him up only to be killed. A cop chopped off a guy's limbs in the middle of town. A guy who killed his aunt because he wanted to know how it felt. A man who beat up his wife in front of his kids and killed himself. A man holding his baby in one hand and with his other hand held a rifle, shooting a cop. 19-year-old girl went missing around a lake near my home on her way to work. COVID hit, which made the case go cold, with very few leads and little evidence. 3 years later, her body was found in an empty holiday home meters from where she was last seen. The only individual with access to the property was on the sex offenders registry and had killed himself 6 months after she went missing. Not long after she went missing, her brother also killed himself as he couldn't deal with his sister being missing. Really affected the entire city, still does. A few years back, there was a fatal crash near me where the person who got their car hit had died because the only got the hit by was drunk. Unfortunately, this happens, but nothing that shook the community too much because it was a freak accident. The next week, the dad of the guy who got hit was mourning in the worst way possible. He was driving his truck and was drunk. This was around the end of the school day. Most high schoolers were at home already, but the kids that participated in sports were still there. The track kids will run a lap around the school property, and they've done this for years without incident. Well, on that day, there was a small group of high school track kids running that same perimeter, and this guy's speeding and driving drunk hits the group of, I think, 6 teens. 2 or 3 ended up dying. The driver fled the scene, but the police found him shortly after. The morbid irony of the whole situation just shook not just our community, but the whole state. That piece of shit cost the lives of kids who had their whole future ahead of them because his son had died the same way just the week prior, and he couldn't cope with it correctly. I have a high school friend who was obsessed with a girl 2 years behind us. The year after he graduated, he went to the school and identified himself as a police detective and said he needed to talk to the girl's boyfriend. The school office didn't ask for his credentials and just handed the boy to him. He then drove the poor kid to an abandoned house outside of town and tortured him to death. He's serving life with no parole. A Current Affair did a story on it, but I can't find it. This happened in around 1989. An incel Nazi walked into a school wearing a Darth Vader outfit and World War II helmet, wielding a sword. It was the week before Halloween, and clueless students took selfies with him thinking it was a prank. He ended up killing 3 people and injuring a 4th. Police ended up shooting and killing him on sight. I was 15 at the time, sitting in class in a different school, and we all got a new notification that there was an ongoing school attack in our city. We had no idea which school, and I remember my teachers frantically locking the classroom doors just to be on the safe side. It was the first school attack Sweden had seen in many, many years. I still remember the victims' names, and I think about them often. There was this thing back in Kanturk, Ireland, where a woman owned a farm with her husband and 2 sons, and she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. There was some inheritance argument where the father and the youngest son vehemently opposed the idea of her selling the farm and splitting the funds between the 2 kids, as the youngest fool had a effing vision of what he wanted to do with the place. So they took her phone so she couldn't contact authorities or help, killed the other kid, and then killed themselves, all as a massive F.U. to this poor dying woman who loved them. Worst thing I remember, shaking my childhood town, was when a group of high school guys left a party to try and buy more beer from the gas station. They got turned down and told to leave. Later that night, when the employee was walking home through a chunk of woods that separated the upper, nicer part of town and the lower, less nice part of town, they followed him into the woods with some other kids from the party, and they proceeded to jump him. The story goes, they beat him with skateboards and snapped both of his ankles with them, left him there, went back to the party and bragged about kicking some guy's ass, and went back a few hours later to beat the rest of the way. I was maybe in 5th or 6th grade, and the part that really effed me up was the list of boys finally being released and realizing a friend of my brother's, who had been to our house multiple times, super nice kid, was the oldest one involved in the entire incident. It was found during the trial that he had essentially froze and didn't partake, but was still there either way, and I learned that you never really know what can happen to anyone. Small town or big city. People are disgusting. We used to use those trails all the time as kids to cut to school or friends' houses much faster than following the roads or sidewalks that went around the mountain. We never liked passing through there much after that point. It took years for most of us to even consider passing through. I used to live right next door to the Manchester Arena, and I was outside in a taxi when the bomb went off in 2017. 22 people killed. I didn't fully realize what was going on until I got into my apartment and turned on the news, but I knew something bad had happened because there were thousands, and I mean thousands of people standing in the streets outside with phones in both hands, crying and trying to contact their loved ones. I had to bail out of the cab in the end. You can still see in my Uber history the moment my driver ended the journey right outside the arena. I found out the next day that one of my best friends from school had lost one of his closest buds in the attack, and that one of my work colleagues had lost one of her family members. I also later found out that some people I knew had been at the arena, and that some other people I knew had gone to school with the attacker about a decade earlier. It all hit too close to home. Everybody knew someone who had been affected by the attack in some way. A horrible, horrible summer. One that had a profound impact on me.